Hey! It's been a while, man. Look at this. I got my camera up. I'm back here of all places. I couldn't record my face for the longest time, but I'm back now. With really sad news to say I am all but done, after the Nintendo Switch generation at least, with collecting physical video games. I kind of want to just talk about this a little bit and get my thoughts out there. Maybe we can have a discussion down in the comments and just have a good time listening to my wonderful, beautiful voice. So let's do this. Physical games. In my experience collecting physical games on the Nintendo Switch, it was extremely fun, and it has been a lot of fun, but it has been unbelievably exhausting in so many different ways. And if it's one thing I've realized when it comes to collecting physical games, is that it's probably about the time to give up on collecting physical games. If you're like me and you enjoy collecting games in a physical aspect, you have, like the cases, like here's a good example. Bam, baby. This is such a good game. For Super Mario Bros. Wonder, I think it's about time to give it up. Now, I don't say this because I'm trying to say it's doom and gloom and that physical games are going away forever. I don't know if they are or are not. Probably, it's looking like it. I would guess the digital future is in the next 5 to 10 years. But here's my problem with collecting physical games. Let's take an example, like we get this little game right here, for example, Ring Fit Adventure. This, such a good game too. But you see that? It's Ring Fit Adventure, so it's blurry. Got a lot of updates, right? The physical game itself 100% works. If you don't update the game, you can still play Ring Fit Adventure and still be able to do it on your Nintendo Switch. But with a lot of games these days, there are so many updates that make it better and improve and give you extra content. Sometimes it's free. It just gives you such a better experience, but you will not have that on your physical cartridge or your disc, regardless of whether or not the full game is on said disc. And I think that's the tough part about this, is there are so many games now I feel like desperately need a day one patch or just come with a day one patch, that you don't really have the option. If you really want to play the game the way it was intended or the way it should play, you have to update the game. And at that point, why would you even bother having a physical copy if the game itself is broken on release? Take, for example, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I know a lot of people said on release that they had no problems whatsoever. I don't believe you. There's no way. I think you just tunnel vision the issues out of your memory, because I had nothing but issues. I couldn't go more than 15 minutes without seeing some very annoying bug or glitch or performance issue in that game. And the patches have been slowly but surely making it better, but that game, even now, is not in a playable state, in my opinion. At least not for me. It hasn't ran well enough, right? I own the games physically, but at the same time, those games, even in this state, are still worthless, technically, in a lot of sense, except to look pretty on my shelf. And then there are games, you get things like the new Star Wars game for the PlayStation 5 that came out this year. 70 gigs of it or whatever it is, not even on the disc. Not even there. You get 50 of the game on the disc, and then the rest you still gotta download digitally. It was kind of like last year's Call of Duty, where it was, 50 megabytes on the disc and 200 gigs you still had to download digitally. So what was the point then in getting disc? What is the point in getting any cartridge or disc if it's not on the disc 100%? And then if you even get games that are 100% on the disc, with all the future contents and updates that these games get these days, what is the point in getting it on the disc? Again, this is coming from a guy that still collects games physically for the most part. But my PlayStation 5 now and my Xbox Series X, those games, those collections, they're all 90% digitally, and I hate to admit this, I haven't really missed the physical collection part of it. And I think a part of that just changes with the way things are progressing. Now, if these games could release 100% on the disc, and even if they did get updates and stuff, sure, collect away. I have no problems with that. As a matter of fact, there's actually some online stuff. If you go online, there's a list of all the PlayStation 5 games that are 100% at least for the most part, fully playable, all the content on the disc. One example of that is Death Stranding, Director's Cut. It's all on the disc. It hardly needs any updates, and even the updates don't do enough to really make it like, oh, it's night and day difference. That's the type of game now, if I see that, it's like, yeah, I'll still maybe pick that up physically. You know what I'm saying? Because that is still all on the disc. I can just put it into my PlayStation 5, it just rips it right off the disc, copies the game, and I'm good to go. But there are a lot of games that have a lot of drawbacks and just don't do what they're supposed to. Hogwarts Legacy, apparently, the entire game is on disc, but it requires you to have a day one update, a small update, but it requires that update in order for you to even download the game. So effectively, you still have to be online to play Hogwarts Legacy, at least to rip the disc onto your console and play it. You still have to do that. It's kind of a weird thing with that game. But that's the thing I've realized is there's all of these ifs, ands, or buts as I'm going around playing and collecting physical games, and that definitely includes my Nintendo Switch collection. I have so many physical games on the cartridge, but a lot of them, a huge chunk of them, we're talking hundreds of these cartridges, are effectively not that great or useless because the whole game isn't technically on the cartridge, or the game runs so much better with all the updates, or all the DLC is missing from it, or sometimes, the cartridge doesn't have the entire game and you still have to have a big old 40 gig download patch. So I love collecting these games physically, but it's got to the point where a huge chunk of my collection is just kind of there for showcasing. It's just artwork at the end of the day. And that's kind of a bummer when you think about it. It's not like back then, right, when you had a GameCube game and you put it into the disc and it works. There's no such thing as updates. So companies had to really try their best to make sure the game was as polished as possible. At least they're supposed to do that. We all know some games back then that just were terrible, right? But all the same, what you got is what you got. There wasn't no, we can fix it on day one. We can fix it down the road. We don't have a roadmap for all these things. You had to have a quality product and at least a fully functional game back then, or that was it. And you would lose the consumer's trust in an instant because nobody wants to keep giving money to a company that can't produce a full, fleshed out product. And now that I sit here, it's kind of weird to be here in a state where I can see the shift and the change in the video game industry and really know what it was like back in the early 90s when you put in the NES cartridge or the SNES cartridge and it's weird, right? It's weird to not have the same amount of physical games that you used to be able to access and play on day one and forever could play on day one. No internet required, none of that stuff. The other reason why it's been really hard for me to continue collecting physical games is because physical games are really expensive now. I can pick up an indie title that's $15 digitally, and if I want to buy that indie title physically if it comes out, it's usually $35 to $40, and that's not hyperbole. Legitimately, tons of companies that publish and produce indie titles that would otherwise be unavailable to you physically, companies like PM Studios or Limited Run Games, or you just pick one of these companies. These games are usually $10 to $15 digitally, maybe even $20, but then the turnaround to sell them physically is $35 to $40, and it's just a lot more expensive. And that's unfortunate, and I understand why these companies are doing it, because they're doing collectors like myself a service, but that's still a lot of money. And then don't even get me started on the Nintendo Switch with all of these companies that do things like Limited Run Games where they have only a certain amount of copies sold before they're gone. And they're not the only ones that do that. There's Limited Run Games, there's super rare games, there's strictly limited games, there's special reserve games, there's Play Asia has some, and IM 8-Bit has those as well. I mean, that's six companies. That VGNY Soft has that. I mean, there's 7. You get the point now, right? All of these companies are doing this thing where they have certain games that released, and if you don't pick it up on the day it released or could be pre-ordered or whatever it may be, there's only 2,000 copies made or 3,000 copies made, and then they're sold out, and then you'll find them on eBay for $100, just like that. A $35 game now became a $100 game because it's rare. And as someone who's been trying to collect as many Switch games as possible, I've gone through all of these retailers that I just mentioned, and I have bought a bunch of their games. But it's exhausting. It's tiring. It makes collecting physical video games a lot less fun because it's so much work and effort, and you got to be on the up and up about what games are releasing, what indie titles are coming out. Do I really want these? And it's just, I couldn't possibly collect them all, right? There's no way. I don't have that much money, especially since I don't make money on YouTube. I'm not some millionaire that could just throw money at anything he wants. And so that just makes it all the more difficult to even be able to collect Nintendo Switch games. And here's the worst thing about this is happening now for the Xbox is getting all these special releases like this, as is the PlayStation 5. Even on limited run games' store, there's over 80 now in the limited run PlayStation 5 collection already, and it's only been out for 3 years now at this point. So it's just, it's not fun anymore because it's so tenuous. It's the most tenuous task trying to collect everything, and that's another reason why I'm just like, screw it. I can shift to digital for the majority of my games at this point. So going forward, I think for the next Nintendo Switch console, the Nintendo Switch 2 as we'll temporarily call it, or I will call it the Super Nintendo Switch because seriously, I love that title. I think I'm going to still buy some of the games physically. The franchises that I really, really like and enjoy, Super Mario Bros. Is a great example. Zeldas and Kirby's. Absolutely going to buy those physically if they're available. Fire Emblem, you know it, baby. Got to get those, right? But for a lot of the indie titles and a lot of the third-party titles, I think I'm just going to start buying them digitally because it's going to be a lot more convenient for me to play these things on the go that way. And like I said, all these things I just mentioned have really made me realize that physical media and physical games are a dying breed and they're on their way out, and in a lot of different cases they're not worth it. Now I know for people that like to buy things physically, there is the aspect of you can resell them at a later time, which absolutely I have done that at myself, so that's definitely a valid point. But I'd like to pass the question off to you guys now. How do you prefer to game? Do you like physical? Do you like digital? Do you see the plus and minuses of both? Like I said, primarily my Xbox games now digital, and I love it. My Nintendo Switch, I have most of them physical, and I still do love it. It's just, it's a lot to take in physically, and maybe I'll someday be able to show you guys my collection if I can get it looking in a way that looks cool, because we're talking about a collection that's over 1,000 plus games, and I think you'd really enjoy that library to see all those games showcased somehow. I just don't have the space because I live in a relatively small house with a family. So, all right, guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to this old guy ramble. I appreciate it deeply. I am Bradley Overrated, out like a trout. Take care, guys. See you on the next one.